Hello and welcome to Jacob's Toys. Please do like, share, subscribe and all of those things. All support to the channel is very much appreciated. In this video I am talking about a concept wave or a concept series of Marvel Legends figures that I would love to see them make. Now, the MCU is a huge part of the Marvel Legends franchise. They do the comic book characters and they do the movie characters, and they've done that from pretty much from the beginning of the MCU. They've given us figures from back to Iron Man 1 all the way through to the modern films and the modern TV series. But there are a handful of films and characters that weren't necessarily as part of the MCU that hold a very fond place in collectors and fans' hearts. And I think that it's about time that Marvel Legends address that and give us some kind of legacy line. Now, this is not a new concept. When Deadpool 2 came out, we had a handful of characters from the movie. We had Negasonic Teenage Warhead, we had Deadpool, we had Cable, we had Domino. And around the same time, they also gave us a few extra characters. They gave us a Mystique character. They gave us a Magneto and a Charles character with alternate heads, so that you could have the new versions of the characters, the younger versions, or the original versions of the characters. So we've got like an Ian McKellen Magneto, and we've got a Patrick Stewart Xavier. However, that was it. We got the Magneto, the Charles, and we got Mystique, and then they kind of stopped there, didn't do any more. We've had a handful of Wolverine figures, Hugh Jackman Wolverine figures, from tank tops to jackets to suited ones from Logan, but it kind of all just stopped there. Fast forward, and we've got Spider-Man No Way Home, and we finally got an Andrew Garfield Spider-Man and a Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. This was looking cool. This was kind of addressing those gaps that we had in our collection, that those fans of the movies who kind of go back that far and remember the films coming out. We were now able to get action figures of those characters from those movies into our collection to stand alongside the likes of Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man, and Chris Evans' Captain America. However, there are still some films that I think they need to address, they need to kind of revisit, especially with Deadpool and Wolverine being so successful, and of course bringing back a few legacy characters.
So here is my idea: Marvel Legends series Legends. So this would be a concept wave or a concept series based on historic Marvel movie characters that we haven't yet had a Marvel Legends figure for. I think it's a wave or a series that is there just dying to be made, especially with the recent reveal of the Deadpool and Wolverine figures. There's a lot of hype about these. I think they could revisit certain characters from this movie in action figure form. But if they're going to do that, why stop there, and let's actually have a few more. So let's jump into it. The first, hands down, has to be Blade. This is a 1998 film, of course, starring Wesley Snipes. Now, we saw Wesley Snipes return in the recent Deadpool and Wolverine movie, and it was really cool to see him, but I think that they need to go back, they need to revisit the character and give us an actual Marvel Legends figure of Wesley Snipes' Blade. Of course, the first film came out in 1998, and it was followed by two sequels. The third one, Trinity, that of course starred Ryan Reynolds as well. But I just think it's an opportunity there. There's an opportunity there to give us that Wesley Snipes figure. We did have one in the early days, I think it was Toy Biz, but it's very dated now. So let's have a Wesley Snipes Blade figure. The next one, in my opinion, would be the 2007 movie Ghost Rider starring Nicolas Cage. Give us a decent movie version Ghost Rider, and you wouldn't even have to go down the lines of getting Nick Cage's likeness, because you could just give us the Ghost Rider head. It's got to be done. It's an old movie now, 2007, but it's one of those original kind of Marvel films that we are desperate to have a figure for. We had it again, similar to the Blade figure. We had a Ghost Rider's movie wave of figures. I've got the bike, for example, still in my collection. I've done a custom of Nick Cage's Ghost Rider, but I would love to have an official one, especially with the modern tooling and the pinless joints and all that kind of stuff. I just think it could be a very cool figure. Next for me would be Thomas Jane's Punisher. This was a 2004 movie, and I still love it to this day. I really do. It's not 100% comic book accurate, but it was a Punisher movie. It was the early 2000s, and it was just cool. It was just a fun movie, and I really enjoyed it a lot more than I did the follow-up, the sequel, Warzone. But to have that 2004 version of Thomas Jane's Punisher in action figure form would just be awesome. Again, we did have a version of this. I think it was in the Toy Biz days, but it just hasn't aged well. So just give us a new version. Give us a version of Thomas Jane's Punisher. 2008's Incredible Hulk movie starring Edward Norton. Give us one of those figures. We've got loads of Hulks. We've got loads of MCU Hulks. I would really like to have a 2008 version of the Incredible Hulk. And maybe even give us an Abomination as well, because he's shown up, hasn't he? Tim Roth's Abomination has shown up in She-Hulk, but give us maybe a 2-pack with Ed Norton's Hulk and Tim Roth's Abomination. Again, you wouldn't have to get character likenesses, because you could just do the Hulk and the Abomination. You wouldn't have to have the kind of depowered forms. There's the 2003 Hulk movie as well, but that feels very much like a standalone movie, whereas the Ed Norton's Incredible Hulk was tied in more with the MCU. So having a figure of this version of Hulk on the shelf would just be an absolute plus. 2003 we saw Daredevil, starring of course Ben Affleck. Now, okay, it's a weird one. Interestingly enough as well, we got Jon Favreau as Foggy Nelson. And then obviously he later on went to play Happy Hogan. But it would be just cool to have this version of Daredevil on the shelves. I think if we're talking about kind of legacy, if we're talking about Legends figures, having a 2003 Daredevil, before we had the MCU, we had Daredevil. And again, you wouldn't have to go down the roads of getting Ben Affleck's likeness, because you could do a masked version of Daredevil, but it would just be cool to stand alongside the figures that I've already mentioned. In 2005 we saw the follow-up, the Elektra follow-up, starring Jennifer Garner in the title role. Now we have seen her of course in the recent Deadpool and Wolverine movie, but I'd really like to get this version of Elektra based on the 2005 film as a Legends legacy figure, because this was Elektra. Now the film wasn't amazing, but it was still an Elektra film, and the costume for me was comic book accurate enough to pass as an Elektra kind of costume. It would just be very cool to have this version of Elektra stood next to the Ben Affleck Daredevil on our shelves. However, before all of these movies, in 2000 we got the first X-Men film, and of course we would have to have a James Marston's Cyclops figure. Even in the black leather, I don't care. It would just be cool to have that version of Cyclops on my shelf. Now, if we're going to have Cyclops, there are of course other X-Men that we need to have. We've got loads of Wolverine, so I'm not fussed about getting another Hugh Jackman's Wolverine or Logan, but there are some other characters that I'd like to see, including Halle Berry Storm. Now, interestingly, she was rumoured to return in this Deadpool Wolverine film, but she didn't. But having Halle Berry Storm would also be a huge plus for me, as well as Frankie Jansen's Jean Grey. Now, I'd quite happily have her as Jean Grey or as the Phoenix from X-Men 3, I think it was. But yeah, just to have a Jean Grey figure as well. I think I'd opt for this red version of her just because it would stand out against the others. But yeah, Jean Grey. Kelsey Grammer's Beast, I don't think he showed up until X-Men 3, but either way, Kelsey Grammer's Beast would also be a plus to have alongside these, as would Alan Cummings' Nightcrawler. Now, not the most comic book accurate suit or version of the character, but he was still quite a cool version of the character at the time. He appeared in X-Men 2 and was one of the more popular, one of the more kind of focused on characters, but I'd very much like to have this version, Alan Cummings' version of Nightcrawler in action figure form. We have had them previously. They did a whole X-Men wave of figures. I can't remember who it was that made them, but they haven't aged particularly well, so let's have some updated ones. And I've tried to limit it, but if I could have one more X-Men from that franchise, it'd be Shawn Ashmore's Iceman, who starred in the second and third film, I think it was, and we finally saw his kind of ice form in the later films. But again, it was just a very cool version of Iceman, not the most comic book accurate, but I'd love to have the X-Men, let's say X-Men 3 version of Iceman on my shelf. Especially because when those figures came out originally, the Iceman figure was particularly hard to get hold of and not a lot of people had it. So if we could have an updated version of that, that would be cool. Moving away from the X-Men, let's look at 2005's Fantastic Four. Now these films, the first one and the later sequel, The Rise of the Silver Surfer, weren't overly well received. I actually really loved them at the time, I'm not going to lie. And we did have figures back in the day of these, and they haven't aged particularly well at all. But to get all four characters in action figure form with a new tool in and everything would just be really cool. Just in those blue suits, you know, comic-y enough that they kind of match the look of the movie. But yeah, that would just be a very cool 4-pack to put on our shelves. Of course, Chris Evans did show up in Deadpool and Wolverine as the Human Torch, but the costume was slightly different to that one in those two films. So I think the popularity's there and the kind of the fire's being reignited, excuse the pun, but I think to give us a kind of Legends version of the Fantastic Four, especially with Chris Evans' recent revival of the character in Deadpool and Wolverine, would make for a very good 4-pack. And of course, the movie that never was, Channing Tatum's Gambit, was supposed to come out. It never did, but we finally saw the character take to the screens in Deadpool and Wolverine, and we need an action figure of this character. You could put it into this Marvel Legends line, because the film should have been out years ago. It should have been out around the time of a lot of these other films, and I just think that it would be a nice way of tying in this character and kind of solidifying his legacy as this character in action figure form. But either way, give us a Channing Tatum Gambit figure ASAP. The only other two characters that I can think of from a movie that I think we need are Topher Grace's Eddie Brock / Venom from the 2007 Spider-Man 3, and of course James Franco's New Goblin. The reason I'm including these two is that we have revisited the other characters and villains from these movies with the recent Spider-Man No Way Home wave. We have a Sandman figure, we have a Dr. Octopus, we have a Green Goblin. We're obviously going to get an Electro and a Lizard, because they are two of the characters that were included in those movies that we haven't yet had an action figure of. However, give us a Venom from Spider-Man 3. Is it as cool looking as the modern Venom from the Tom Hardy films? Of course not, but it's still one of those kind of Legends characters, one of those legacy characters that I think that we need, along with James Franco's New Goblin. Again, you wouldn't need the character rights for the likeness of the actors, because both of these characters have things over their faces, and you could just give us the actual characters.
There we go, that is my list complete, I think. Couldn't think of any others. These were all the ones that kind of came straight to me when I was like, who would I like to have a figure of based on the older movies? And this was pretty much my list. Now we could go down the route of villains and side characters and all the rest of it, and there could be literally hundreds. I think that these ones that I have spoken about are what I would class as kind of needs, as kind of legacy characters. Are there any I've missed? Are there any that you feel that we should include or should be included if Marvel Legends and Hasbro did ever approach a legacy kind of line or a legacy series? Is this something that you'd want to see? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, if there are any characters that you think I've missed, again, let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. Please do like, share, subscribe, and all of those things. All support to the channel is very much appreciated. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon.